I should introduce us, of course. I'm Monica Brooks. I'm the Dean of University Libraries here at Marshall. I'm actually in, I think, oh my gosh, my 28th year at the university. And I'm part of the Hispanic Heritage Committee. And one of the things we like to do is share information about our culture and various cultures in the Latinx community so that people are a little more aware. And my mom, Amelia Garcia Brooks. You want to say anything?
I'm also on the committee, and
Yes.
so we're going to have a good time coming up September the 15th.
September 18th
So 18th
is the kickoff, yes. We got some good things planned. But little known fact, I know the library staff know this, but Mom was a cataloger at West Liberty State College for many years. So if we need her to do any materials for us, because we're in between assistant catalogers right now, I could put you to work. Not interested.
Only if it's double paid.
Oh, okay, exactly. So the home base for La Carpa was San Antonio, Texas, which is where our family is from. And we thought it might be fun for you to see some images of what San Antonio was like at the time when La Carpa was in its heyday. The pictures that we're going to be using are from our family collection, also from the Hertzberg Circus Museum in San Antonio, Texas, the Whitty Museum, also in San Antonio, Texas, the Institute of Texan Cultures, and also materials from the Library of Congress. So we've been very fortunate that there's quite an array, even though we don't have as many pictures of our own family that we wish we had. We've got some wonderful things that are representative of the time. The Garcia family came to the United States, as I said, more than 100 years ago. And Manuel and Teresa Garcia came here in February of 1914. Teresa and Manuel are my great-grandparents, or my mom's grandparents. And they were already performers in Mexico, and they were fortunate to have the opportunity to purchase a circus that went out of business, right, Mom?
Yes.
And so they had a tent and some other accoutrements that were already part of that business that closed. And also our mom's grandfather had the skills because he had worked in the entertainment business. At the time, the tent shows were very popular. Because this was a way for the Mexican families to enjoy the theatrics and the experience of entertainment in a very low-cost environment, because the tent shows would travel from city to city. There were several tent shows at the time, and the word carpa is also the word for tent. So you'll hear us use the Spanish word carpa interchangeably with tent, and of course it also denotes circus. So these are very similar to what you would have seen at the time in the beginning of the last century. The three carpas that were quite famous in this area that were, you know, La Carpa Garcia, of course, while they were in existence, were Carpa Cubana, or the Cuban show, I think is what it was in English, and I always say this word wrong, Carpa Monsiváis. Monsiváis. And we've been fortunate that we are still acquainted with some of the members of the descendants of the Carpa Monsiváis. And it's really great that we've got those connections. And even now you have had some people say that they remember even playing in bands with your dad. Very cool. As you can see, the costumes were amazing, and we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to talk a little bit more about the costumes and some other things. The carpas were family affairs. I mean, the entire family got into the act, and of course there were, you know, hired hands and additional families that also participated with the Garcia family. There were relationships between the carpas as well, so sometimes they performed for each other's shows. And then there were also some romances and some marriages between the families of the various carpas. So you'll see that as we progress that there were a few families that married. And it made it a little tricky for us because one family was the Gonzalez family that married more Gonzalez, so we have Gonzalez's in our family. That makes it a little tough. And I think we have a representation of Garcias here today, don't we? Raise your hand if you're a Garcia. Woohoo! Yay.
No relation.
No relationship. What a coincidence that we love. Okay. As the shows traveled from city to city, it was a huge endeavor because, of course, they had to pack up the tent, they had to pack up the bleachers, all the band instruments. There weren't a lot of animals per se, but Mom, you said they had some.
They hired dog shows for the children and a monkey, just small animals, but they
Portable.
usually would hire them.
Great. As you can see here, the family is kind of chilling in between shows. It's a little bit hard to see, but they had the little caravans that were pulled behind the trucks, and the families lived in the little caravans. You've probably seen, I guess we call they look almost like the ham tins, the cute shape from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And also, they used the trucks. Obviously, the Pilar Garcia, who's practicing on the high wire, was using the truck to tie the wires to walk between to practice. The whole family got into the act. It was, very, very important to keep the tent up, of course. So the whole family participated in repairing the tent and making sure that it was up to snuff. If they got a little tear or something, then they would have to sew it. And of course, the whole family participated in putting the tent up when they would go from city to city. And Mom, what's the story that you remember of them putting the tent up in the night when you were a little girl, little baby? Did you remember hearing the men outside?
No, we had arrived they would rent a big property, and they had to use hand hose to clear. And for that, they hired people from town. And I remember we arrived, and I woke up, and I heard like lots of crickets, the sound. And it's not a very bad sound when it's in unison. It's almost like a symphony. They're all, and I remember must have been 2.5, 3 or so, waking up to that. And I'll never forget it. That was my first recognition of where we were, of what they were doing.
So imagine the magic of the entertainment family. They would go into a place, they would clear the field in the middle of the night and erect the tent in the middle of the night with lanterns, and then poof, first thing in the morning when people would be coming up, getting up in the morning and getting ready for work or working in the yard, magically there was this giant tent and all kinds of excitement, which built the excitement of wanting to go see the show.
Can I say something? Their first production, their first matinee was all the dignitaries of the town. My dad was a front man, and they contacted the mayor, plus all the schools. And the first matinee was for the elementary schools. And it was really a treat for all the kids to see it. That was the whole purpose of coming in the night and having it ready, of course.
That's amazing. So we just mentioned the erecting the tent in the night, and how all of the people of the local area that were hired, they called them mozos?
Mozos.
Mozos?
Muscle men.
Muscle men,
Mozos.
which is kind of fun. So this is not a La Carpa tent. This is actually a picture of Carpa Cubana's tent and the Carpa Cubana workers, but the very similar situation. Sorry about that. I think that's my phone doing weird things. But just they knew on the rotation when La Carpa was coming, and of course, as Mom said, her dad was the front man, and we get the permits and work with the dignitaries of the city to make sure that they were aware that it was happening and would make the matinee for the
And with
first show.
law enforcement also, they touched on everything.
We need a time machine because I would have loved to have seen that. The tent itself, and this is a representation that our uncle made, that is absolutely stunning. It's actually at the Whitty Museum collection. currently, but from memory, he put it together as best he could and did it exactly how they used to do it when they traveled. And as you can see, the bleachers were roped together, which is really cool. And the tent, he had a little cutaway here so you could see how they have the trapeze inside. It's really, really fun. Okay. And there's a couple more images of the tent. And Mom, didn't you say that when the tent was totally packed, some of the wooden pieces were flat and
They were portable. They had to put them together also.
so imagine you had to carry every piece of the tent and all the wood and everything for the bleachers, et cetera, in the trucks, and then know how to put it back together. It's like, don't lose the instructions for your Lego castle or whatever, because it's going to be very similar to that. Okay. One of our friends we were very honored to meet was a student at the University of Texas in Austin. Was it Austin?
Mm-hmm.
Peter Clare Haney. He spent many, many weeks with the family doing some oral histories, and he wrote his dissertation about the songs and the traditions that were prevalent in the Carpas, namely La Carpa Garcia, and recorded some of those little sketches that some of our relatives could remember from memory. And we don't have it today, but it's really fun that we do have a recording of your dad repeating some sketches.
And my uncle.
And your uncle.
Uh-huh.
So it is kind of fun. They're all in Spanish, but it's fun. You can hear, in the cadence, it's, you can tell they're telling a joke or they're setting you up for the big punchline, which makes it a lot of fun. But as you can see, the tent had the area where the tent poles were, the stage, and of course the ticket area, and then practically there were no bad seats in the house. You could see pretty much everything that was happening. And then, as Mom mentioned, being the front man, her dad would make sure that the posters were up in town and that people knew about Carpa so that they could come to the show. And this is a sample of what one of the posters may have looked like. It's a replica. This is our Aunt Virginia, who recently passed away, but for the longest time she was the last remaining performer of La Carpa Garcia. She also danced in Carpa Cubana, and if you're a movie and TV buff, she's the aunt of Clifton Collins. You might know, we'll talk a little bit more about the generations that have stayed in entertainment businesses. But she was very, very talented and also danced. Didn't she dance at the National Theater in San Antonio?
Yes, she did.
But she was very colorful and interesting, and we're very gratified that we also have some oral histories from her.
They were always up to par with what was going on, the music, everything. And she and another gent would dance like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And everything they did, singing in the rain, they would do it. So,
anything that was popular, whatever dance was popular, they would do it.
La Carpa generally was up with the latest music in Spanish or even in English sometimes.
Also with the costumes, you'll notice, and we do have a few images of some of the other carpas, but when you compare the Carpa Cubana costumes, for example, a lot of them were very traditional, and the Carpa Garcia costumes were more contemporary. So that was, each Carpa had their own little niche, and Carpa Garcia was known for being more up with the times.
And my aunts made all of the costumes, every one of them. And I learned that they made their own eyelashes from their own hair at the time. And you're growing up, you don't realize these things. That would have been important for me to know how they did it. I mean, I wouldn't wear them, but just to know.
That's amazing. And to do that while on the road as well, because that was quite trying, but they prevailed. I love this picture. This is the one you just sent me, Mom, of my uncle, Mom's brother, who did get to perform in La Carpa. And you can see he's got the cutest little army uniform, because it was around the time Well, it would have been between World War I and World War II when he was little and coming up on World War II, right?
He was about 5 years old, and he was a singer already. And he would sing of the war songs in Spanish, and he would dress as such, or if it's a Mexican singing, he would dress as such here. But he was a little star. He really knew he was.
So he hammed it up a little bit, yeah, and that carried through in his adult life, which he was so
later he
entertaining.
became a labor, what was it, a labor department agent. Mm-hmm.
So the acts were, as I said, several were very unique to La Carpa Garcia. And another draw were the beautiful girls, of whom you can see there are 2 sisters here, Aida and Consuelo. Aida sadly died very, very young, but she was absolutely gorgeous and charismatic, and people came to see her perform because she was so amazing. And the dances were popular, as we said, of the time. So these are pictures from another circus, but this is somewhat related to La Carpa because this is our cousin Don, or this is Don Robinson, our uncle, and our cousin and his mom carried on the tradition of, retaining the stories about La Carpa. He was a muscle man and an acrobat, and it's at the Cole Brothers Circus, and it also traveled in Texas. And his wife, who was Esther,
Mm-hmm.
She later performed in Ringling Brothers.
Both
we
of
do
them.
have some
Both
pictures.
of them
They were
did.
both in
Uh-huh.
Ringling Brothers.
Uh-huh.
That's great. So, once you're in the circus world, it's not unusual to go from circus to circus, just like some of us go from library to library, right? As you can see in the previous picture, I forgot to mention, another thing they would do, of course, is if Charlie Chaplin was popular at the time. That's not really Charlie Chaplin. That's probably Jose Chaplin in the Mexican circus, or in the Cole Brothers Circus, mugging it up. So they would imitate some of the popular comedians and whatnot, and that just made it a lot more fun.
They said my grandfather was very short. I think he was only like 4'9", and he was the Charlie, the chaplain of the Carpa at the
That's
time.
so great. He would dress up. Children, of course, as we saw my Uncle Manuel performing as a child, only 4 or 5 years old. All the children performed, and here are some images of the various costumes and some of the children. Alfredo Castro, he did not perform in La Carpa, but he is the father of Aida that we just saw, right?
The
Aida
husband,
Jr.
the husband of Aida.
I'm so sorry, guys. We have several Aidas in our family, and it's a little hard to keep track, but it's a beautiful name. Okay. All right. I think I need to go back to my slide concept. All right. So technology is great until you need to be incognito for a little while, and it follows you everywhere. So thank you, Patsy, for disposing of my phone. The talent, as we mentioned, the girls that we were talking about, the sisters, you can see there are several sisters in this picture and a couple of hired dancers. But Aida and Consuelo and Esther were the 3 sisters of the Garcia family who danced quite frequently. And as we mentioned, they made their costumes. This is probably, what, Mom, about 1925 maybe?
More or less.
Coming up on the 30s maybe. And the makeup, the hair, the costumes were indicative of the time, and also the dances. They look like they're wearing flapper caps. I'm so happy. This is Mom's dad, or my grandfather, Manolo. And we mentioned he was the front man, but when he was a teenager, he also performed as a clown. And with his sister there, that's Aida. And the costumes, as you can see, are very ornate. Unfortunately, this image is not that great, but that's actually a beaded outline of an Indian chief on her dress. Very cool. I wish we still had that, but sadly, the costumes did not survive from La Carpa. And very few pictures, because didn't you say while traveling there was a
Some
hurricane?
of ours and some of the other trailers were hit. They were in the middle of the hurricane coming from Corpus Christi, Texas, up to San Antonio. And albums flew out the window and everything. They couldn't find them. Yeah.
Tragic. So we have, I only have, 4 pictures of you as a baby, that's it. And one, you have the mumps. So, yeah, still totally cute, but, yeah. We've talked about Pilar Garcia. He was not of the immediate Garcia family, as part of Garcia marrying Garcia. So Pilar was married to Consuelo. And he was popular for his tightrope act. Of course, there were several members of the family that did this, but we're fortunate that we have at least one great picture of him in costume performing on the tightrope. And didn't you say he also pretended to be borracho when he was on?
Actually, no, that was Uncle Fito.
Uncle Fito.
But he was a dancer as well. He danced all the Mexican dances with my Aunt Consuelo. A good dancer.
And I did find out that your mom also would dance sometimes.
Yes, Mom would substitute as gent.
She was tall and thin and could fit in the men's costume. And your aunt said that she would pull the hat way down.
Yes, she was embarrassed. She wasn't too keen on doing that.
She wanted to know. Yeah, that
but
she was
one thing
in.
about the wire walker, he never had a net underneath, and that was supposed to be really. Wow. But he never had.
He never fell.
And he never fell, and they didn't want anyone to say, good luck.
No.
All the performers, no, it's a no-no, because bad luck can come.
Right.
Very superstitious.
We are going to talk about superstition. We have a little treat for people. The talent also included, as we said, trapeze of different types of acts. And didn't you say that Aunt Esther would actually spin around?
Yes, that picture I think is from the Ringling Brothers.
When she performed in Ringling.
They did the web. She did the web, where they have them all around, and they do it with their teeth, then they go round and round. And she was also the prima donna. She would sing also. They did everything. One of them would do multiple, just so many things.
So not only did she make her costumes, she also performed, she sang, she danced, and she did acrobatics. And didn't you say she also rode a horse bareback?
Sometimes, I think when she was young.
Like standing on the horse.
But not in La Carpa.
That's amazing. So this is not, these are not images of costumes from La Carpa, because as I mentioned, sadly, we don't have any. But these are from another Carpa, and they're indicative of the types of fun little outfits that you might see. And of course, as we said, everybody made them. I mean, you had to know how to do everything. So, as we mentioned a little bit about superstitions, you never tell somebody who's about to perform good luck. So just remember that. Anybody, even in the martial artist series, or your classmates who are performing here in the martial theater program, now that we have musical theater, don't ever tell a colleague, good luck. You can say break a leg, because if you say good luck, then you have jinxed them. But the circus families also had some other superstitions. I mean, if you're a baseball fan, then you probably have seen somebody do all kinds of stuff when they get up to the plate. Very similar, and whatever works, right? Whatever's going to keep you safe on the tightrope, whatever's going to work while you're, standing on the back of a horse. But one of the things that we thought was especially interesting was in Mexican culture, the evil eye is very popular, and I noticed there's a resurgence of the evil eye interest in it currently. And by having a little talisman or a little object of the evil eye doesn't mean that you're wishing the evil eye on someone. You have the evil eye to ward off evil and to keep yourself safe. And we'll pass it.
Sure.
We're going to pass these around.
All
right, Lindsay's going to help. Thank you so much. You're welcome to take one. It's just a little evil eye bracelet.
El mal de ojo. Correcto?
Mal de ojo.
El mal de ojo. The evil eye. But we say in reverse in Spanish.
The other thing you never ever do is give someone who's about to perform flowers before the performance. You only ever give flowers after the performance. And, little things like Lucky Rabbit's foot and maybe a special stone that someone might have in their pocket. All those things are superstitions that have carried on into current day.
Now, this is a hired person that was a singer, a good sort of operatic singer, and he sang like the song Granada. Some of you have heard that. It's a very emotional, high-pitched song, and he also danced. He was a hired person that was forever following La Carpa, and that's my aunt that used to sing and dance with him.
So Consuelo and Rafael Sandoval.
Exactly.
And notice how he kind of looks like Rudolph Valentino in that picture, which is fun. So again, the styles that were popular and the music that was popular.
I'll do that to my girlfriend.
We mentioned a little bit about some of the traditional dances and some of the costumes that were traditional Mexican costumes, and these are absolutely gorgeous, and of course they would have made those. And this is the kind of costume they would have worn to dance the Mexican hat dance, and that my grandmother would have worn to hide her face in the Mexican hat dance. But then they also did other fun dances like the Charleston and whatever was popular. And Mom, what's the style of that? The different, I know each region in Mexico has their own.
That's the China Poblana, and
Poblana.
China is there because of the Chinese when they came to work on the railroads, and they brought all their beautiful embroidery silks and so forth, and that's where the Mexican people picked up of Puebla, the state of Puebla. And they had lentejuela. What's lentejuela? Lentejuela en español? Tony?
Same. It's the same.
No,
Sequence also. I'm sorry. Sequence, okay? And embroidery, and they're very colorful, and that is actually for the Mexican hat dance. That some of you have seen, the guy takes the hat off and the girl dances around.
That's cool. So we mentioned Don Fito briefly earlier, and so Mom, you said Don Fito would actually do the high wire and pretend he was drunk?
Actually, my uncle did that sometimes, but he also, there he's playing a trunk. And he probably did also. And but he was a top comedian, of course, and he, my mom said that he really didn't like to do it. But they recruited him, and he was so good at it because he didn't like to do it.
That's wild.
And he did it. And he was very famous with all the people.
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about how after the Carpa, some of the family members stayed in show business. There was a Mexican theater, or still is, right, in San Antonio?
Actually, it's torn down now.
It has been torn down.
Renewal came by.
But for many, many, many years, until fairly recently, I guess, in the 90s, it was torn down. I don't remember.
Yes, I don't remember because we've been away, so.
But the performers would go to the National Theater and do other types of shows and sing, and they would have touring companies that would come through, and so it was really great that several people were still able to sing and dance and continue performing on a regular basis.
And for several years, my dad was a pianist for the silent movies.
That's so fun, I didn't know that.
Uh-huh.
Also, Manuel Sr., or Manuel Jr., I guess, Mom's dad, had several bands in San Antonio. He had a day job as a sheriff, but at night he would perform with several different types of bands. And Mom, you said they did cover songs, but then they also did big band and traditional,
Oh, yes, everything,
anything, you name it. They probably did bar mitzvahs too.
Everything,
Seriously.
coronations, you name it.
And also, when he was a sheriff, they formed a sheriff's band, and so they performed on television and on the radio
Oh,
and
excuse me,
around the
honey,
city.
it's a policeman's band.
Policeman's band.
Policeman's
Great.
band. Mhm.
And then we talked about the National Theater. This is one of Mom's aunts, Esther, performing at the National Theater. And then the guys in the middle there, one is Don Fito, but in the back is Pedro Gonzalez. I mentioned that, Garcias, Mary Garcias and Gonzalez, not from the same families. but had the same surnames, and Pedro went on to do well in his career. He performed in Hollywood, several movies during the heyday of Hollywood, and he did manage to get in some John Wayne movies, which is really cool, and was lifelong friends with John Wayne.
Well, he was discovered on Groucho Marx, and John Wayne sent an agent, and they signed him up, and for life. And so he was a sidekick in Rio Bravo and a couple of movies, and did all kinds of local things in California and wherever they would hire him. But he was good.
He was very funny.
Good, funny.
And we even loved it. And when Epcot opened, we took there was a little ride inside a pyramid for the Mexico Pavilion, and we screamed because as you were exiting the event, on your little boat on the river, they had people selling fruit, and it was him. It was like, oh my gosh, so that was really fun. So we did a lot of stuff for Disney.
He did some movies for Disney also.
Herbie the Love Bug and a couple of other fun ones. But he finally did get a star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. Sadly, it was posthumously awarded, but it was great that his grandson and his wife were able to accept that on his behalf. So his grandson and granddaughter have continued the show business tradition, which we're very excited about. And probably if you're into sci-fi and you're a Star Trek fan, if you're in one Star Trek movie, forget it. You have a career for the rest of your life. So, we need to be getting on that. So you go to Comic-Con, a big Comic-Con, you might actually see him because he was an alien in one of the Star Trek movies. He was also in Pacific Rim and Westworld. He was a robot. Sorry for the spoiler if you haven't seen it yet. But the sister, one might argue that her career has been maybe even a little more prolific behind the scenes as a casting agent, because right out of the gate, her first big show was Alias, and then Lost, and then Once Upon a Time, all 3 hit shows in a row. That's 30 years right there. I think she's a little bit younger than me, and she can retire, so kind of nice. And then we're also very happy, my uncle Albert and his son are still in show business, and Albert has several bands. Right now, if you go to San Antonio, he's performing practically every night in some venue, cover band, big band, jazz band. Does he have any Mexican bands too?
Mostly it's jazz, isn't it?
Jazz. And then his son is a comedian who is totally cute. He's billed as the Latin Jerry Lewis. And we've seen him perform. He's pretty cute. Yeah, very funny. And then, of course, we have to make a plug for, the fact that so many members of the family went into great careers, education, law enforcement, the military, social work. Yep, activism. And then we were very proud that the family also originated the mariachi choir at Mission San Jose in San Antonio, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I know it's a little hard to see, but Mom and Dad are in there.
Okay. There was another family that
It was another
originated.
family but they married La Carpa people at some point.
No, not at all.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
sorry.
So we call them cousins, but probably just because we're proud of them.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. There was
She was
Alfredo
your
Castro. Alfredo
Right.
Castro. I forgot about that.
Right,
Sorry about that.
Okay.
But they were the directors of the choir.
right. So they just celebrated their 50th. Yeah.
Yes,
That's
I'm
great.
sorry. I lost you there.
Well, there's so many relatives that have done so many wonderful things. It's not easy to keep track. All right. So at this point, we would love to hear some questions, or if you'd like us to elaborate on anything else.
I'm interested in knowing if they resided in San Antonio and then traveled all over Texas, like a certain season of the year, or how that went.
Yes, they resided in San Antonio, and they would travel to California, Oklahoma. My dad was born in Oklahoma. All of the valley, Brownsville, Texas. They stayed within that area. But there was a time that an agent for Roy Rogers, some of you might remember, you can look it up, Roy Rogers was big time, and Dale Evans, they sent an agent and they wanted to hire the whole troop, and my grandfather said no. And he said, we're happy, we make a good living, we help the economy, and they can go if they want to, you can ask them, but as far as the troop, and I'm the boss, I say no. And he didn't do it.
You know, Roy Rogers was born not far from Huntington, in Portsmouth, Ohio.
No. Oh.
I think he was born, well, Scioto County.
Oh.
That's great.
But they stayed, in those areas, which there was a lot of traveling, but it worked for them.
And one thing I think you mentioned was, this was during the Depression, and they prevailed because they had their own business essentially, and they could, they had their own trailers, and they traveled from city to city, so they were relatively unscathed by the Depression, and were still able to make a living, and then of course buy their houses in San Antonio when they retired.
And they even had enough food to feed the poor everywhere they went. My grandmother would open the mess hall, which I
Wow.
thought was remarkable. And then people would barter with them. They would bring chickens or fruit, veggies and stuff, and they would accept it. So I
That's
think
great.
they gave, and they received also. More into the giving when they could.
You talked about one of the family members going and putting up flyers. Did that person go in advance of the rest of the troops so people knew they were coming?
Yes, my dad, he spoke English, and my mother sometimes would help. And they would go to all the local offices, the tax place, everything, covered everything, so they would not be in violation of any law.
So they would go a week before?
Yes, the close places, they would contact them and come back, but like California, or they would go a week, I think.
One of the other things that they did that we learned, or that I learned not too long ago, was they had something called the convite.
Oh, yeah. Convite is inviting you, okay? That's really what it means. And they had this truck, and they had the trombone, some musicians in the back of the truck, and they amplifier, and they would invite people, just like the politicians used to do in the South. And they would go down the streets and bring in La Garcia and et cetera, et cetera. And that was part of their advertising.
That would be fun to see too.
And one day I got lost, okay? They couldn't find me, okay? So they would take kids from the neighborhood that wanted to go. And there was always an adult taking care of them. So what happened, I climbed back there. They didn't have any kids whatsoever. And they were looking for me, they were ready to call the police. And somebody says, we better check the truck. And sure enough, I was back there enjoying it.
You were in the convite.
I was in the convite. That time they gave me a couple.
That's funny. That would be frightening though, because you were probably in a city,
Mhm.
relatively unknown city. Anything else?
Was there a particular reason why they stopped performing together?
Grandmother was of age and was coming down with the usual Mexican problems of diabetes and so forth, and asthma, and it was time to call it. But fortunately, she was very wise. She had bought property for every one of their children. And when they retired, she gave them each so they could build their homes.
And some of those homes are still there, being beautifully maintained.
Ours was torn down. It
That
was
one's
sold by
gone,
the
but-
church bought it. We were next to a Catholic church.
But some of the cousins still live in their houses. At least one
They've
family.
sold, but they've moved on.
One addition to the question over here, there was a circus fire in New York State, which resulted in a significant loss of life. And the federal government passed a requirement to treat the tents with fire protection. And the family, the tent was old, and times had changed. The radio, you had even the beginnings of television in the 40s. And so it was time to, in a sense, to give it up. But they had great years, great years. And so you'll know, the lady in white and blue there is my wife.
And her father.
That's
I
my
heard
wife.
someone call you Mr. Garcia not too long ago. This is the other Dr. Brooks.
Actually, that's a lot of truth in that.
That's great.
We went to a high school reunion one time, and I very quickly became Mr. Amelia Brooks.
San Antonio.
Go me.
I do have a question. Before you met Mr. Garcia, when did you actually perform? Because you mentioned that some of the kids actually performed. Were
Right.
you ever a performer?
I wasn't born yet. I was 4 years old, and when they sold everything, I was 5.
Okay.
But I remember vaguely things, but my brothers were like 5 years older than I am.
And they did get to.
Yes, my younger brother performed. He wanted to perform. He was quite an athlete, but he was little, and he wanted to perform. So they taught him how to do the trapeze, mind you. And he got all dressed up and his cape and everything. And his first performance was at the elementary school where he was, first grade. And whatever you do, you if you fall, you pick up and you do the job. You don't look back. You get back on the trapeze. Well, he was wonderful and so forth. And he did fall before his class, and they said he got up and just shook himself, and up he went, and the crowd went crazy. And he did perform, but I was too young. Mhm.
We can't verify this, but there may have been another child of the Garcias, Esmeralda, or what was her name?
Esperanza.
Who was young and sadly died on the trapeze. And they never spoke
Actually,
her
it
name
was what
again.
they called, what was
La
it?
Porcha.
La Porcha.
Porcha.
And it was an act where they would stand up on their shoulders, and she was the last one. Supposedly she fell and she got killed. She was like 16 years old. They never talked about it, because in show business, the show must go on. And they kept on, the performance had to go on. And they never talked about it. And that was so that there would not be any fear. That was the main cause, not bravery, because they did suffer from it. But they never ever talked about it, and we didn't know until way back. And we cannot confirm it. We have no records, nothing.
She would probably have been born on the road, and if there were documents, they were destroyed in the hurricane or tornado that took place. So we can't find her.
Nothing.
And Esperanza means hope, right?
Hope. So.
But a hard life, but also a fulfilling life.
Mhm.
Imagine if any of us had to do that today. Oh my gosh. It's bad enough schlepping our book carts back and forth from the library. So I can't even imagine going from city to city, performing and doing such tremendous
And
work.
the danger.
And the danger, right.
Of doing all the acts and whatever.
Right.
And one thing that I really remember about my father, and I really am pleased with this, we were in San Antonio, we retired, and we went down there to live. And a friend of ours from Corpus Christi, Texas, brought us to this obituary of this gent that had passed away at the age of 80-something. And after 60 years or so, my dad was mentioned by him. He and his friends used to try to go under the tent when they were performing to see the show free. They were kids. And my dad, always a policeman, he would do the rounds and to see that things were okay, and he would catch them. But he'd give them a little talk and invited them to come free. And then he would invite them, since they were there a few weeks, to come and he would teach them tumbling, because they loved tumbling. And he did. And this Jan had passed away, and he was paying homage to my dad. And because he became a great athlete, and Dad taught him how to do a somersault and all this, and he would do it when he was playing football. And he would get away. He was a star, okay? And he got a scholarship to one of the universities and was a coach. So he died, and he was paying homage, saying thank you. Mr. Manolo was my dad's stage name. Manolo Garcia, because it always stayed with him. He taught his football players how to do it too. So after 60 years, can you imagine?
It's awesome.
And then there was a famous judge in San Antonio that he and the kids did this, his friends did the same thing. And Dad being a deputy sheriff, he would go in with the cases and to court, and he said Judge Machado would sit him, and they would talk for hours because he remembered that he would let them go under. So I thought that was
That's great.
kind-hearted.
And Mom, you said your mom told a story of when she made candied apples and hired a kid to sell them.
They hired local people, right? So she would had a little concession stand. She'd make the apples. The kids would go out and sell them. And one time, she would check on them. And one time she came around the corner, and this boy was licking the apples.
Put it back.
I mean, that sounds like that comes from a movie, right? And he said, "Oh my gosh, how many have you done?" Of course, that poor little boy was fired, but she gave him the apples.
Ew.
Such a lot of stories, a lot of things that happened that were super classics. Yes.
Any other questions?
So I'm always curious, how did your family go from La Carpa to the coal fields of West Virginia?
Well,
Well, that's a different story.
Yeah. That's the next chapter.
you can tell them, David.
Right.
Well, I was in the United States Air Force, and I was taking a night class at a local community college, San Antonio College. And first class, I saw this beautiful girl at a little break room, or little machines and tables and things. And the second week, I walked over and introduced myself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm from Bluefield. What you don't know is that when they put the choir up there, I had often thought, and I've used this line before, growing up in Bluefield, I often dreamed of singing in a mariachi choir.
And you did it.
But I did it.
Yeah.
So much, I'm
You're in there.
on
You're
the
on
right
the
end,
end.
the front row.
Yeah.
I was a little heavier then.
It was great, and it was a lot of fun, because I think 3 different times when my sister and I were at the choir to hear our parents perform, we ran into Marshall faculty, because
Yes.
they were at a conference or whatever, and just thought, oh, let's go check this out. So, yeah.
It was the first mariachi choir in San Antonio. It came from one of the cities in Mexico, all of the music and all of the arrangements. And it's been going now. We were blessed to have been there the year that we reached the 50th anniversary. And it was just wonderful. And it's still going today. And by the way, we still get a text every week telling us what songs are going to be sung in the Mass that Sunday.
Nice.
We're still getting that.
And sometimes you even get, somebody puts a video
Oh, yeah.
on the
Oh.
piano so you can hear.
Yeah, it's one of the things that Amelia and I truly miss was performing with this choir. We really do.
Think we can get one going here? Tony and Helica? First we gotta play instruments, and I just play the trombone, that's not gonna help.
Start.
Yeah, it's a start.
I just want to say, I think it's great that you captured the history like you have. You've so well preserved the history of the circus and your family. this is like an oral history, it's very impressive.
Thank you.
Something you can, keep alive for your different generations and those of us who don't know about it can learn about it, but this is quite impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's impressive, the whole thing's impressive, first and foremost, and then the fact that it's all here for everyone to see and appreciate. So thank you for that.
We did have a little help because the Institute of Texan Cultures, of course, has preserved as much as they can of the Garabas, since they were a very popular art form in that part of the country. But bringing it to West Virginia, that's all part of the spirit of La Garba, take the show on the road. And my own staff know that there's a little bit of circus in me, because how many times am I like, hey guys, we're gonna do, and they're like, where are we gonna get a blow up such and such? And I'm like, where are we gonna find a giant Connect Four? So, yeah.
We
But
have
it's just fun.
a few of the younger generation that are very interested, and one particular young lady, Adriana.
I forgot to put her in the presentation, but they know about her because she is our cousin Adriana Garcia is a Buda Belpre winner. That's library talk for the Latino Caldecott Newberries, and we have her books.
She's a fantastic illustrator. Fantastic.
She's amazing. She really is. I'm so sorry. I meant to put something up of hers because her images are just stunning. And can't believe that I neglected to do that because I even had some pictures on my desktop.
But she wrote a script about the Garcia, a musical. And it was fabulous. We were fortunate to be there. And this were all young children performing. They had a community center. And they had, performance of the arts classes and so forth. And she created, with another young man, a script. And they did a beautiful job that I wish, they went on the road locally and so forth. But I wish that, what's his name, our favorite, Evita writer.
Oh, yeah, like something like Angela Weber.
Yeah, I wish he would get a hold of it.
Yeah.
And I think
They were
that
that
a
good.
little addition to that is that Adriana added a section in that musical to remember Esperanza.
Right.
Yes,
she did.
that was very,
She did, and it was very
touching,
heartfelt.
very beautiful.
Yeah, I've got slides on Adriana, and I can't believe I didn't put them in today, but she is a fabulous illustrator, and if you ever have an opportunity to go to San Antonio, some of her works are on buildings because she's a muralist. And also in some of the parks there, she's done some amazing murals that depict the history of San Antonio, for example. Just absolutely stunning.
Graduate of Carnegie Mellon.
What's her last name?
Garcia.
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 Yeah, she
Yeah.
has a website.
She does have a website. I will include that. I usually send Elizabeth info. I'll send you the PowerPoint that you can share, and I will include Adriana's information. It was so fun to go to a library conference with my cousin because, the library world usually doesn't mesh with the entertainment world, but it was great to see her accept her award, and I'm sad I didn't get to see her accept her award this last time. But it's pretty awesome to win it twice. Yeah, so she's on her way.
So I imagine that these shows really help to break down some of the prejudices that people might have carried back in the day. Once you've seen the show and you've gotten to talk to these people, is there a way that we could use this history now to fight the racism that seems so prevalent?
Pete Haney did touch on that a little bit in his dissertation. I'll send you a copy.
Okay.
Of course, it's in our database. But he did talk a little bit about the healing factor of, the sharing of stories and the songs and similarities that the cultures have. And Tony.
Yeah, my question is not as deep as hers. But you mentioned that you like organizing stuff and everything, and we all know that. But being a Trekkie or a Star Trek fan, when are you bringing your cousin for the next EarthCon?
Oh my God. He's so big
I'm just
time.
asking for a friend, okay?
Yeah, for a friend. We haven't talked about, trying to get him in some way, but I don't know if we can afford.
No, I'm
it,
just,
you know.
I'm just
Yeah,
kidding on
yeah,
that.
wouldn't it be something? Clifton
Oh,
Collins.
Clifton.
Yeah. I do have a Star Trek uniform, so maybe that'll entice him. Get on FaceTime and be like, hey, cousin.
Yeah.
And I'll probably scare him away. I think for the theater students, talking to Veronica would be awesome because
Yeah.
she made a successful business out of her casting agency and what it takes to pull off a show. If you watched any of those shows, especially Lost and Once Upon a Time, they were very, very well represented with different ethnicities and genders, and it was an excellent show to show that like the villain was Hispanic and this person was Asian. It was really great to see the kind of a melting pot on screen. Very cool. If there are no more questions, we would love very much for you all to partake in the goodies. We brought traditional pan de dulce, the conchas, the sweet bread that you see out there, and we really hope that everybody gets an opportunity to sample those.
I have to tell you that the conchas are made with eggs, and as I was growing up, we always had a continental breakfast in my home. And I remember my first time, I guess I must have been about 4 or 5, I had my first cup of coffee. It was delicious. And a concha for breakfast. It had everything in it, the egg, And I never had cereal until, I guess, when I went to high school, I
After
think.
you got married,
After I got married, because we didn't really want it.
Well, Mom Tony mentioned the concha and cafecito in the morning. That's
Ándale,
the way to go.
exacto, exacto.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
You've
for
been a
being
wonderful
here.
audience. Wonderful audience, thank you very much.